And I'm going to talk about estimation and planning. That's a phrase that we just use a lot, those two words together a lot in the industry when we're talking about figuring out how long things are going to take and planning out the development cycle and how it's going to come to an end. So I'm going to spend most of my time, though, actually talking about the estimation problem. How do we actually estimate? And this is a very challenging thing for a lot of people, not just software engineers, but in general. So how often do you, for example, have somebody come and do some work on your house and you say, how long is it going to take? And they'll give you an estimate of, in our case, maybe a month, and then 3 months later, they're still working on it. So, so estimation is a big problem, not just for us, but for everybody. It's particularly a problem with software development because we have to do it so much and so frequently, and we actually manage our processes around estimating. And we're supposed to be done on a certain date because there's going to be a big marketing push that starts then, and they've planned it all out and marketed it and so on. So anyway, estimation is a big issue. So now, again, let me refresh with you the software development cycle. We start with the business model or the business requirements, and then we go to the product requirements. And then we go to the UX design, and then we have the technical design and implementation. And then we have deployment, testing and deployment. I guess I should put testing here and deploy. So traditionally, what has happened when the industry first started building these big projects early in my career, we would do these in steps. And one after the other, the business leaders would say, this is what we need from the business requirements for our system. And they'd toss that document down to the product team. And the product team would put together their product requirements. Again, this is we've been through this a few times, and then the product requirements would take it to the user interface team for doing the user experience and so on. Then that would go to the technical team, who would then do the technical design and the implementation, and then it would go to the testing team, and then finally to deployment. And so this process of pushing things down from one step to the next, to the next, to the next is we referred to as the waterfall model. Because it's like the water falling down the hill. Once it flows down from here to here to here, it's very, very hard to get back up, unless you're salmon. I guess sometimes the salmon can get up, but even they won't be able to go too many steps up. So it's very, very hard to move back up. So this is historically shown to have a lot of problems with in the software development world. It's too rigid, it's too hard to cycle and iterate. You'll get down here and you'll find out there are problems in the product requirements that you can't implement properly, or things take longer than you expected. It was very common for these types of projects from start to finish to be 1 to 3 years in length. And they were almost always late, often about double the amount of time that was originally estimated would be when they'd finally get finished. And so it was really tough. So as I've said before, the solution to this was started out with something called XP, extreme programming, later became agile. And as I like to diagram, it takes all of this and just throws it all together and puts it in a mix and makes it very iterative, and we go around and around and around. So that's nowadays, these agile development processes are pretty much what everybody does in the industry. They're still, like in government jobs, there's very frequently still this waterfall, but they're less common, and we now try to do things more agile. And the main features of these agile developments is you only know a little bit up front. So you don't really know all of the problems or all the requirements. Not everything is all known yet. And then we iterate. So we know a little bit, we get started, we do some design, we iterate, and we go back and we know a little bit more, and then we iterate and go through the whole thing again. And so you're frequently cycling between the product requirements, the technical requirements, and the UI design, and it kind of, eventually you hope cycles down into a solution that you're going to be happy with. And then also use the whole team. Let's see, what do I say? It's a cross, what's the word I'm thinking of? Cross-functional teams. Usually, I said teams, usually singular. So you take somebody from each one of these areas and you put them together, and that's the team that runs it. So in the waterfall model, once the product team hands it off to UX, they usually walk away and go work on something else, the next project they're working on. And they don't really see it again until it comes to deployment time. But in the agile methodologies, you have a cross-functional team that's engaged the entire time. And then you usually do work in small increments, which they usually call sprints. And a sprint will be 1 week, 2 weeks, depending on the team. They'll decide how often they do these sprints. And so the idea with the sprints is that you figure out what work you're going to do over the next 2 weeks, and you get all your planning done and with all of everybody on the cross-functional team. And then you start doing your implementation. You go for 2 weeks, and then when you're done, you have a sell-off, which is where you all get together with the development team. Usually it's the development team is selling off the work they did to the product team. And the product team is looking at it and saying, oh yeah, that is what I designed. That's what I want. Good job. Or they'll say, that wasn't quite what I wanted. Or sometimes they'll say, that's what I asked for, but it's not what we really need, is it? It doesn't quite work yet. And so they'll go back and rework the design and add the work to another sprint. So anyway, this is kind of the process with work, anyway, that's how it usually goes. Now, again, this is just a review to kind of show what this process is, because I'm going to talk specifically about the biggest problems with this approach. And they come out with, anybody have any idea what could this looks so great, so pleasant. You just kind of work on things and get a little bit done. It's like sweeping around the house. Oh, let me clean up over here. Let me clean up over there. Oh, now I need to go back and do up over there. So it's kind of this very nice process. What could you imagine could be some of the biggest problems with it? Especially if I'm the business owner up here. No guesses? Yeah. Yeah, so exactly right. Henry said it's hard to get a timeline because everything's kind of up in the air for so long. And that's exactly right. It's actually the number one problem that agile methodologies have is figuring out when you're going to be done. Because there's no way to know. You don't know because you started without a full knowledge of what you're doing. You're iterating and iterating and iterating. Have I iterated enough? I don't know. How many more iterations is it going to take until you're finished? I don't know. It depends, because we don't know. We're refining and iterating as we go. So figuring out how long this project is going to take is just basically impossible. When you're doing this. So figuring out how to estimate and because a business really needs to know how long it's going to take. If I'm going to fund the development of a product, I need to know how much time it's going to take and how much it's going to cost before I fund it, because that's the only way I can know if it's going to be profitable for me or not. So that's a huge problem, is just figuring out how much time it's going to take, how much it's going to cost. The other one is the marketing team comes in and says, oh, this is great product. It's looking superb. I want to have a big marketing push for it. When should we schedule it? Well, I don't know. We're in the middle of these iteration cycles. We can't really tell you. And so, marketing usually they have to schedule buildings and press releases and media interviews and all this. And so they have to know months in advance when it's going to be ready to actually go talking about. So these are huge issues on the estimation side. Now, it turns out that it's not just estimating that end date that's the problem. That's the biggest problem, is that estimating that end date. But also another big problem is with estimation is in, any other guess? During this process, estimation has to happen. Any thoughts? Right there. We get our team together. We're going to start a sprint. How much work are we going to commit to getting done this sprint? Well, if I can't estimate my work and how much work I can get done, I can't tell you. And so then we can't even do our increments unless we are able to estimate and figure out how much time it's going to take to actually get things done. So, so even at a smaller scale, we got this big scale estimation problem, but even at a smaller scale, we have an estimation problem. And then we have to figure out how much work we can commit to each sprint. Okay. So anyway, those are the biggest problems with, or places where we need estimation. So, okay, fine. So we just sit down and say, oh, I see that amount of work. We'll have that done. And we have 2 weeks. We can do this piece. We'll just pick it out of there. That's almost never successful. Why? Why is estimation such a hard thing? Unexpected problems come up. We don't account for ramp up time. Any others? Technical problems come up that we hadn't anticipated. So we got all these unknowns, these challenges that come up. Yeah. Yeah, we don't know how well we work together, how much communication we're going to have. Even if we've been working together for a long time, we don't really know all that stuff. Yes. Competing projects, exactly. Distractions, I'd call that. And it's not just competing projects, but it's meetings. How much of my time am I going to spend on meetings? And we fail to account for all of that. And so when we come in to do this estimation, we get it wrong. It's very, very hard to estimate. Oh, there's one other that is really fascinating to me. And that one is, I won't make you try and guess it, but that one is programmer productivity. But I will make you guess. There were some studies done, I think in the 1980s, by Bell Labs, which was still existing at that time, and it was the premier research facility in the country. They had these, they did some studies on programmer productivity, and they came up with, they discovered the ratio between the most productive and the least productive developers. I may have done this with you guys already. I can't remember. But anyway, any guess on the ratio? Fastest to slowest of competent software engineers. 40, 60, 40%, 60%. Keep guessing. A factor of, let's do factors. The fastest is twice as fast as the slowest. 4 times. Keep going. 10 times. Keep going. 50 was too high. The number they came up with was 20 times. So you literally could take a project, hand it to the slowest competent engineer, and it would take them about a month to get it finished. You'd hand it to that same project to the fastest engineer, and they'd have it done in a day or 2. I mean, it's huge. So when I'm doing estimations, if this fast person is doing the estimates for me as to how much work we can get done in a sprint, they're going to bring in a whole boatload of work because they can get it done. And then all these, everybody else is a whole lot slower than them is going to be, I can't do that much work in this amount of time. So it's very, very challenging from that standpoint too, to get our estimates right. So anyway, that's just a fun fact. All right, so we're very bad at estimating for all these reasons, but there is something that we as humans are very good at. Any guess? We're very good at procrastinating. I will say that is true, but that's not clearly not where I'm headed with this, because I don't think that's the solution to our problem. What? Making excuses, not what we're good in, what we're good at that can actually help with this, rather than making excuses and procrastinating, is we are very good at comparisons. So it's very hard for various reasons. I don't know if it's just human or if there's something more fundamental to it, but it's very hard for us to look at a task and say, this is going to take me X number of days to get done. But we are very good at looking at a task and saying, oh, that one's about the same magnitude as this other one. Okay, or that one over there is more like this one, and so on. We are very, very good at comparisons. And so we can compare them. And if we, so as it turns out that some clever people have figured out a way to use this ability for us to do comparisons to solve the estimation problem. So I'm going to go through how that works. All right. So before we can really do, before we can compare tasks, we have to have some way of measuring them and putting some type of a measure on these tasks to help us understand that. And the Agile community came up with what they call points. Anybody heard of points? Sometimes they're called story points, task points. You not heard of points? So points, a point is just an arbitrary number, usually a small number, a small integer, between 1 and 10 or something like that. And it's just a number that you assign to a task, which indicates on some arbitrary scale how hard it is. Okay, or not how hard it is, but how much time it took. So I have a 2-point task and I have 5-point tasks and so on. So the numbers are arbitrary, but they aren't random. They are designed in such a way that if I have a task that has X points, and then I have another task that is 2X points, then this second task should take roughly twice as much time to finish as the first one. So this ratio between the points is important. Although we have no idea what X represents, how much time or anything else, we know that if I have an X task and a 2X task, this one will be twice as long, take twice as long as that one. So that's points. So that's how we usually do our estimations now, is we no longer try and figure out how many days it's going to take. Instead, we say, oh, that's a 3-point task, or that's a 1-point task, you know, and so on. And in the nomenclature, you kind of get used to what you know, what are points and what's not, and how much they represent. So what do those points represent? So let's figure that out. Here's one of the best ways to figure out, or how to calibrate and figure out what your points are. So what you do is, first of all, you have to keep a log of all the work that you've done. And I recommend that you start at some point just seeing, okay, I'm going to take on a task, do a project, write it down. This is the task. Just put enough information in there that you'll be able to remember what it was. And then you track how many days it took. Calendar time. You track calendar time. Don't track time I sat at the keyboard. You track calendar time. And you have a log of all of these tasks that you did and about how much calendar time they took. So then what we do is we find from those, you get a handful of those tasks, usually that took between 1 and 5 days, and you scan through them and you find some baseline tasks. So you have your baseline tasks. You pick a small one that took about a day, and then a medium, which you try to get, which is twice the small, So maybe a couple of days. And then you get a large, which will be about a week, right? So that one that took about a week. So 5 days. 5 times the 1. What did I put small there? That was funny. Anyway, so oh, twice the small. That's what I meant. Okay. And this one would be 5 times the small. All right. So I have these baseline tasks. I line them up. I get everybody on the team to agree that these are good baseline tasks, that this is a small one, which is about a day. Usually you don't estimate anything lower than a day. This is a medium task, about twice as much work as the other one. This is a large one, about 5 times as much. So I get these baseline tasks, and then I assign arbitrarily points 1, 2, and 5. Okay, so that's my points. I now have told you how points relate to tasks. So any task that is similar to this small one is a 1-point task. Any task similar to this large one is a 5-point task. So we do that. And then we're able to move forward from that. So now I now have a project that I'm supposed to do, and I know what the project is. And my goal is to try and compare it to these ones that I've already done and that are my baseline ones. And then I can estimate from there. Well, usually you'll have a project. The team usually isn't assigned a project that's only going to take 1 day or 3 days, 2 days, or 5 days, right? You might get a whole bunch of those tasks, but usually your goal is to build a project, and it might consist it might be 3 to 6 months worth of work. Well, you can't compare that 3-month project to one of these. These are too small. So what do you think you do? What? Multiply it out? Well, what do you multiply? First, I have to break it down, right? So I have to break this down. Usually you have one member of the team just sit there, maybe the tech lead will sit there and take this project, and they'll try and break it down into smaller tasks. And they have to break it down into 1, 2, and 5 point, what they consider to be 1, 2, and 5 point tasks. Okay. So sometimes that will be hard. So they'll have to go get help, and they'll have to try again, and so on. So you kind of break it down until you have everything down into nothing larger than 5 points, or things that you're just saying that one's too hard, or that one's we don't need to do that one yet, so we'll push that one off till later. But the stuff that you're thinking of doing, especially when you start your sprint, I make sure that the tasks that are being considered for the sprint, I go and I break them down into these small tasks. Now I can compare those tasks to the baseline. Okay. And now I can go through each of these tasks and I can compare it to the baseline. If I find that one of the tasks is really bigger than 5 days, then I have to do some work and break it down. If I don't get enough smalls and mediums and everything's in the large, then I haven't broken it down enough, and I have to break it down further and break it down. So I have a big pile of 1, 2, and 5 point tasks. Okay. So that's what I've done now. And now that I have that, I can take all those tasks and just sum them up. And that gives me my point total for how this project, I can now say this project is a 60-point project because I've been able to do all this breakdown. Okay. Okay. So, oh, by the way, when you do this comparison to baseline, you don't do it with one person. This is usually you get the whole team together and you'll spend a few hours taking and comparing all these tasks to these ones. And you take one of the tasks, you'll say, okay, this task, guesses or estimates on how many points this is. Oh, another thing I forgot to mention was that the points are usually Fibonacci numbers. You know what Fibonacci numbers are? It's you take two numbers and you add them together, and that gives you the third one. Then you take the last two numbers and add them together, that gives you the next one. So it's the sum of the previous two. The next number is the sum of the previous two. So it goes, you start with 1 and 1, then the next one is, so 1, 2, what would come after 2? 3, what comes after 3? 5, 8, 13, so on. Okay, so usually we use Fibonacci numbers. That's just historical, but it's kind of nice because as the numbers get bigger, they get farther and farther apart, which reflects reality. Because as a project gets bigger and bigger and bigger, it becomes harder and harder and harder to accurately estimate it. So if I'm sitting here looking at, I don't remember if 60 is a Fibonacci number or not, but it's either going to be, so it might be 50 and the next one is 45 and then 80. So you have to pick one of those, and they're really far apart, and that is advantageous because it reflects the fact that I'm now into the, it's hard to estimate space or stage because they're so far apart. So anyway, so I pick these Fibonacci numbers. I add up all of my small, medium, and large. They're not going to add up to a Fibonacci number, but they'll come close. And so then I just pick the next larger Fibonacci number, and I say, okay, that's the number of points for this project. All right. Okay, so I've got the number of points, but that doesn't tell me time yet. How do I get from points to time? See how long it takes you to do a 3-point task? You are the person who's 20 times faster than you. 10 different people, there we go. You track the team. So usually what you'll do when you're starting out is you'll just pull a number of tasks off your task list and say, we think we can get this much done in one sprint. And they add up to 35 points. So we think we can get 35 points done in a sprint. And then at the end of the sprint, you look and see how many you really got done. And maybe it was only 20. And so you do that for a few cycles, and pretty soon you kind of get, you kind of figure out how many days it takes to complete a point for the team as a whole. You never do it on individual basis. It's for the team as a whole. So our team can now do, say our team is doing 25 points per sprint. So if I have a 60-point project, how long is this going to take us? How many sprints? Yeah, 3 sprints. So I'll get that done in 2+, so in 3 sprints. You always round up, always round up. So I'll get this done in 3 sprints. So this is now a 3-sprint project. So that's how we come up with those numbers. And I've now been able to convert that to how much time it's going to take. So that's how you pretty much go with how you work your way from comparisons to how long a project will take. Now, as the project gets larger, thanks to the Fibonacci numbers, it gets harder and harder and harder to get a good estimate. I actually sat, after I left Google, I was at a company where they were using this approach, and they were estimating out a project that was very large. And they came in at, when I joined, they had estimated it would be 1 year. And just shortly after I joined, the next estimate came in at 2 years. And then I sat in a meeting where they went through this process. They added up all the points, and they came up with 3 years. So, and then I was working with the engineers. This is a 3-year project. And we were working through what it is we actually had to get done. I was kind of new on the team. So, but I finally got to where I understood what it was we were doing. I talked to one of the engineers and I said, this doesn't feel like a 3-year project. It feels like a 3-month project. And he agreed. And so we went to the managers and product managers, and they were surprisingly reluctant to lower the estimates, but we finally convinced them to do it. And they ended up shipping in 6 months. So, but anyway, so that was the purpose of that, was just to show you how hard it is to do these estimates on long projects, and how where this agile process really breaks down is on those big projects. So anyway, now I've got that. So now the other side, the flip side of this is I can now take a big project and give you a rough estimate of how many sprints it's going to take to finish it. Okay, going through the process we did. But there's another thing that we have to do here in our agile process. We have to go to do what? We have to figure out how much we can get done in a sprint. I don't have that on the board anymore. I was looking for something to point at, but it's not there. So we have to be able to say, okay, I have a sprint coming up. This is the number of, we've done all our estimation. Here's our big list of tasks. I need to know how many of these I'm going to commit to getting done this sprint. So how do you do that using what we have here with our estimations and the data that we've been collecting? Okay, this one's easier. Everybody's looking at me cross-eyed, but it's all right. I already know that my team can do 25 points per sprint. So I just run through the tasks and I pick them out until I get 25 points worth, right? That's what I commit to. So it's easy. That becomes pretty easy. But there's a trick. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is there's a real trick here still, because I might be able to pick 25 points out of the bucket. Which 25 points do I choose? That is the next topic. How do I choose among the 250 points in my breakdown that I have? I can only get 25 of them. How do I pick them? How would you do it? Necessity defined as? So I picked the MVP project tasks first. Good. Okay, everything's MVP now. I've got that narrowed down. I went from 250 down to 200 points. Now what? I still have 200 I have to pick from, and I can only get 25. Which ones do I do? The hardest? Yeah, we talked about doing the hardest ones first. That's good, but it's probably not the best way to go. I'm assuming that you've already gone through and figured that out and taken that care of that, but you're right. You want to get the biggest challenges done first. So how do you prioritize? I guess you can, what I'm going to say next, you could say the hardest. First of all, you take the, we call them critical path. You know what the critical path is? You've not heard of the critical path? The critical path is called that because there's a sequence of things that have to get done before the product can ship. And this sequence is longer than any other path. So you want to make sure, so this one is pretty much determining the amount of time, the minimum amount of time that it's going to take to finish. So you want to make sure everything on that critical path gets done first, because if it doesn't, you're going to push your ship date back. And, because you look at, there's all these paths, and the critical one is basically the longest one. So you get that done. So another way to say that is the roadblocks. Anything that's keeping you from moving forward and getting things done. Those are the ones, you pick those out first. So, okay, we've done that. And now we're down to, we went from 200 points to 100 points. Now I still have 100 points in there that I can choose from. Which 25 am I going to pick? Okay, so I learned this from this whole process, by the way, I learned at Google from a guy that I very highly respect on how to do this type of estimation and planning. And this is the formula that he taught us, which has a lot of wisdom behind it. So what you first of all do is you take your tasks, and for every task, you figure out two different metrics. Number one, value, and number two, cost. But these have to be numeric. It can't say, oh, this is really, really, really valuable. And you can't say, oh, this is really expensive. You have to put these into numbers. So you put this into numbers, and the way you do value is you assign it a dollar value. This is how much dollar value this task contributes to the company. Now, you might say it's impossible to figure that out, but it's really not. You can usually figure it out because you can, take engineering hours and multiply it out if you need to, or you can take, oh, sorry, not the cost, the value. The value you can usually say, you know, when I get this feature out and this product done, then it will have this much revenue coming into the company, or there are various different ways that you can find to turn your value into numbers, usually in dollars. Usually that's product manager has to go do that. So they'll figure out the value of everything. So this is usually the product manager's job. And then the cost is usually points. So you just figure out the cost in points for each one of the tasks. So now I have all my tasks. I have my 100 tasks, and I figured out the value and the cost for each one. Now what? In what way? Yeah, you divide the value by the cost, and that gives you your priority. So what this does is this means you're doing the tasks with the highest value first. And if you have something that's really, really high value, but it's going to be extremely expensive to build, it drops down in the list. If you have something that's only low or medium value, but it's really easy, it bumps up. But for so this helps you get the easy high values, the easy stuff done quick and get it out of the way, and that helps you a lot. And then the high value stuff generally then bubbles up first. So this is how you prioritize. And if you do it this way, you can do a little math and prove that your team is delivering the highest value over time by doing this approach. And so that's how you go with it. So anyway, that is all I really want to say about the whole estimation and planning problem. And I just want to wrap up with estimating how long it's going to take to do things is a challenge. It's very, very hard. But by using the comparison approach, you can usually get a handle on what it is. But that requires you to keep logs and to keep track of what it is you've done and how long it actually took. Not how much time you spent in front of the computer, but how much calendar time. Because if you do calendar time, it takes into account interruptions and meetings and everything else that happens. And so you've got calendar time in your log, and then you can use that to build your baseline with. And then finally, the guy I learned this from at Google taught a course on how to do this. He brought the team and the product managers together, and we spent 3 days going through this process and figuring out. I spent 45 minutes with you on it. But we went three days through it to really get down on the details and how you do all of the estimation, the comparisons and everything. And I had one of my teams implemented it and the other ones didn't. And the team that implemented it became much, much, much better at predicting how much work they could get done, getting their work done quicker and getting it done better, because they had a much better idea as how to break down the tasks and how to work through it and get it done. So it's a very valuable technique, one that you're going to want to adopt as you go forward. So that's it. Any questions? Yes. When they saw the success of the third, they adopted it. And sometimes with a little bit of pressure from above. So I forced them to, but it really worked. And then of course, as they went forward, they didn't stick to the precise process. We put together these ideal processes of how things should be done, and then we adapt them to our own work habits and situation. So they adopt them and adapted them. And the team as a whole, all of us started doing a lot better. So, all right, anything else? All right, thank you. That's it, Brett, unless there's questions there.
Do we have any questions? Looks we are good live. So that's it, Robert.
All
Thank
right,
you so much.
thanks.